Hello everyone, so welcome to part 2 of this Tzeentch army roster. So essentially what we're going to go through today is all the units in the roster and their stats before and after research, redline skills, and XP. All of these, I have the details on my spreadsheet, and I also have all the unit cards available for you on the Google Drive. If I don't link it down below, if you wish the link, just let me know. And without further ado, yes, let's start with the specifics of the Tzeentch army, actually. So the first specific that we have is that, of course, they have many demonic entities, such as these screamers of Tzeentch. What it means is that once leadership goes low, they are not routing. Instead, they are going to start taking damage, a lot of damage. So just make sure that when you see the leadership go down, you retreat those units, because otherwise they're just going to die there. They do gain physical resistance and fear and terror immunity, which is good, but always make sure that we retreat those units, otherwise they die. And then we have the Mark of Tzeentch for most of the mortal units, basically giving them barrier and magical attacks. So throughout this this video, I'm not gonna talk about the barrier. I'm not gonna talk about the magical attacks, because almost every single unit in the Tzeentch arsenal, if not every single unit, has magical attacks. And the barrier works like an extra hit points. It basically regenerates itself. So think of it as like 10% of the health points actually being able to regenerate. So you can do some things like charge in, retreat, and then wait for the barrier to regenerate, and thus have almost unlimited health, in theory. Finally, we do have some battle abilities, and these are generated by casting spells with the Windows of Magic. So you can get the abilities of Arcane Surge, which gives a power recharge of plus 80% and reserves per second, so which is always good, of course. A Bolt of Change, this is a bombardment, one projectile. It does have a nice sundered armor, and this is quite important to mention, because there's a lot of units that suddenly become way better because people forget that you have a lot of ways of reducing armor. Or you can have a massive bombardment with the Storm of Fire, a very large strike area, all armor piercing, which is great. Number of projectiles 180. This does tremendous damage. So speaking now of some differences, because there are two red lines actually for the Chaos troops. And in this case, I actually switched them. So the left one is for the Chaos Lord's red line skills, and the right one is for the Heralds. I'll be doing the Herald line here on this video, basically because that's the one that is used by most legendary lords, and thus you'll always see this one. The other one, you can opt whether or not to use Chaos Lords or Chaos Sorcerer Lords, which have that. But you can see the difference. For instance, even in these units, Exalted Pink Horrors of Tzeentch get a lot of armor if you use on the Chaos Lord, while instead they gain some more barrier and more leadership and speed if you use on the Herald line. So you should study a little bit what you want the enemy to become, or how you want the unit to become, depending on the red line skills that you're going to choose, of course. And the focus that you're going to have is if it is on one red line or another. Now, infantry, we have Marauders of Tzeentch. Of course, they do have the Mark of Tzeentch, and that's going to be the last time that I'm going to talk about it. But yeah, everyone has the Mark of Tzeentch, so Marauders of Tzeentch, they just become better than the typical Marauders of Chaos. So they have a shield, which is always nice. It's good for any front line. They have better melee attack than melee defense skills, decent weapon strength. These are your basic units to have on your front line in the beginning. Quickly you're going to change that, but of course, if you have to recruit these units even in the mid game, they should do fine, especially with some redline skills. Just don't count on research doing a lot. As you're going to notice, research in blue in the changes there doesn't exist too much. I don't know why, but they don't change too much. So Next unit we have Marauders of Tzeentch with Spears, and this is a much better unit. Why? Even though it's like a very low tier unit, it has that bonus versus large, and the good melee defense means that these guys can hold off light cavalry, medium cavalry, even light monsters really well, and especially up to their price. I mean, it's not like these guys need to go against the best of the best of the best, but they'll do a good job making sure that the enemy cannot just go around and take over your missile units, because they'll have to go through a staunch line of spears. Very good unit, especially for the early game. Then we have the Blue Horrors of Tzeentch. Now, they are classed as melee infantry that should never go into melee. Well, kinda. They have 4 ammunition only, and the idea is that you have this sort of precursor like the javelin attack of the Hastati back from Rome 1 or Rome 2. But it's a very low range, so you can have some lines of blue horrors and then later on pink horrors and behind and stuff, if you wish. They have a decent missile strength for that, but only 4 and later on 6, as you can see there on the upgrades. It's not enough to make them a missile or a hybrid unit. Basically, these guys are kind of like Nurglings or zombies. Their purpose is to put on the front to absorb enemy charges and everything, or just to summon them in some cases, and not to count on them on winning battles for you. So a very versatile unit, I would say, a very hybrid versatile unit. If you wish, you also have an ROR, the Chromatic Abominations, which they do have a shield, which is interesting. You know, it's not like they have a lot of armor, but they do have a shield. I don't know where, but they must have hidden it in a hand or something. Abysmal melee or melee defense or melee attack attacks. You know, they do have the magical and flame attacks, but they do have a barrier boost, so they can replenish their barrier, which is good. And they do have 360 missile block, which is kind of weird. It's just a weird unit. I guess these guys are kind of good to, without the enemy realizing, putting them at the front to soak some missiles while you approach. Perhaps that's the use, but don't count on them winning battles for you. Instead, let's look at the better front line, the Tzaangors. If you have the DLC, of course, these guys are really good. Silver Shield means missiles will most of the time be wasted on these guys, and they have good 50 armor. They have plenty of passives, which is why those stats are so enhanced. They also have Vanguard, which is perfect for many of the ideas behind Tzeentch. Tzeentch is rather a complex army, and the more that I was doing this army roster, the more I realized, hey, some units I really didn't know the ins and outs, which is sometimes I like to redo these just to remember about those. So that Vanguard deployment is really good. This unit becomes like a tier 2 unit, maybe on the set of like not Longbeards, but almost there, you know. A unit that with that Vanguard can do some damage, you know, can reinforce where it's not expected. They have magical attacks, so that you can use them against units that are weak against them. So overall, very versatile front line. But the best overall front line, especially early game for you, or mid game if you wish, it's the Chaos Warriors of Tzeentch. Of course, typical Chaos Warriors, silver shielded, lots of armor, good melee attack and melee defense values, a nice weapon strength with 10 armor piercing weapon damage. That's about the highest of a unit that doesn't have, you know, that has shield and sword, okay? So don't neglect that, and don't neglect the charge bonus. This is a front line that you should actually charge with, you know? This is a unit that you should remember to charge with these guys, because they'll benefit from that charge bonus. Late game, you can definitely have armies of Chaos Warriors with some other units, even if it is just for the cheapness of it. You'll have plenty of availability for these units, and it's not like they cannot deal with tier 3 or below units. They can do their own, they can handle their own, and especially with proper support, with some spells and such. Don't neglect that. Many people can often never go into Chosen because Chaos Warriors are that good. If we go into a different style, we go into Forsaken of Tzeentch. Now, this is a damage dealer infantry with the frenzy. That's good. It enhances the right stats. Has good armor but no shield. Abysmal melee defense but good weapon strength. So overall, everything here screams that these guys should be behind someone with a shield, and then you move them in and they'll do all the damage that is necessary. Of course, because they have that barrier and because they have that frenzy and such, they can do a lot of damage very fast, very quickly, and then you can retreat them, see if the barrier replenishes, etc. That sort of idea. So Forsaken of Tzeentch are kind of like, especially late game, are kind of like one of those units that you can still use. Not like Forsaken of Nurgle, which are kind of like the best version of Forsaken, but they're still like the second one best, I would say. Chaos Warriors of Tzeentch with halberds comes next, and of course it's one of the best units in the game in terms of dealing with large entities. That's their main purpose. Heavily armored, not a lot of speed, which is their weakness, but a good melee attack and melee defense, and of course that armor piercing with a bonus versus large. This is their bread and butter. These guys should be on the flanks of your army, and if the enemy wants to charge cavalry there, good luck to them. It will take the hardest of lords or of cavalry to even punch through these guys and do enough damage, or to even be worth it. Especially late game, as you can see, most of their good stats actually gets increased. The melee attack, the speed, which they need, the leadership, the armor gets increased, so the health barrier. They even get a little bit missile resistance, which they lack the shield, so that's good. So overall, Chaos Warriors of Tzeentch with halberds, alongside the other Chaos Warriors, you can definitely have a good army there. But if you prefer the best of the best of the best, Chosen of Tzeentch. Now, of course, everyone knows Chosen. These guys wreck anything that they can get their hands on. The biggest problem is that they don't have a lot of speed. Silver shields and a lot of armor, good melee attack, excellent melee defense, and nice weapon strength. That 14 armor piercing weapon damage, just because you don't see the armor piercing there, doesn't mean that these guys cannot deal with armor, you know. They certainly can. And remember this about Tzeentch, they have a lot of ways of reducing armor for the enemy. That's why Chosen of Tzeentch and some of the Chaos Knights that I'm going to talk about, that's why they're so important to sometimes have, because you will have ways to reduce the armor and therefore make them very effective. So alongside the Chosen of Tzeentch, of course, you should bring some Chosen of Tzeentch's halberds. Alone, these guys can handle almost everything. These are kind of like the perfect bodyguards for any infantry, missile infantry or artillery line, because they'll just wreck anything large that comes in. They have dragons, don't worry. You just put a Chosen of Tzeentch halberd there and watch that dragon die. They have good cavalry, let's say they have crushers with great weapons, let them come in. This is the unit that you let them munch on, because they'll certainly munch on them. Especially late game, you can see the stats getting increased. Just make sure that you check on the Chaos Lord as well, because they do enhance them severely better. If not mistaken, Chosen are the units that actually you can get better with the Chaos Lords. Now, to an ROR that it's kind of like different than others, it's actually an aspiring champions ROR, because you have only 16 units, and of course it's like the aspiring champions but with halberds. And the main deal with these guys, it's precisely that bodyguard idea that I gave you. So Tzeentch has a ton of lords that are flimsy, right? So imagine that flimsy lord in the middle of these guys. Good luck to anyone trying to get them, because with that armor, with that high leadership, with that weapon strength and bonus versus large, who are you going to send to defeat your lord? I mean, these aspiring champions can deal with that, or you can just go forth with these guys in the middle of your front line just to deal with whatever large entity the enemy has, and they'll kill it. That's for sure. I don't know if there are many large entities that can survive the aspiring champions, the Severed Claw. So overall, yeah, one of the best actually ROR units in the game. Let's talk missile infantry, and we start with Pink Horrors of Tzeentch. So the first actual missile infantry, notes that it always would say decent melee combatant, but I guess that's talking about the barrier and the fact that they do have, you know, magical attacks and flaming attacks on those normal attacks, melee attacks, let's say. But basically their best use is actually the missile, and they do have a nice missile strength. The issue with these guys is the range, 130, because most, you know, high elves will have like around 160, 180. Gunpowder units will have around 140, 160 sometimes, and the range of 130, it's still lower. It's kind of just slightly less than what you would desire, so it just means that these guys have to get closer. Tzeentch kind of has to get closer than other armies to the enemy to be able to use your ranged power. So it's kind of like a ranged power army that really doesn't have that much ranged power. It's weird. It does have ranged power. Don't get me wrong, but it's a little bit weird because of how the range works. You'll always feel like you have to approach the enemy, and that's where you gotta bring in some shielded units or someone to absorb enemy missiles. If you wish an ROR for the pink horrors, you have a very weird one. I cannot express it enough. So 15 base missile damage and armor piercing missile damage of 5, it's good. Decent range with 130, it's the same. But they have a passive ability. If they die, they explode. While nice, and that's cool if these guys get surrounded or anything like that, of course they're still demonic. So if they start dying, their leadership goes down, and suddenly you lose the whole unit, and this is an ROR unit, you'll have to wait turns to recruit. So I don't know if that it has too much of use. I don't know if that explosion can help them survive the combat or not. Just remember that if you see them explode, it's not a bug. Remember, they're demonic, so be careful. You may see a chain reaction of them exploding everywhere. Now, if you prefer the best missile infantry unit from Tzeentch, it's the Exalted Pink Horrors of Tzeentch. Now, yes, they deserve the decent melee combatant. They're like swordsmen. You know, they're like tier 1. They're better versions, actually, I'll say even better. They're better versions of the Marauders of Tzeentch, okay? They don't have these shields, but they're better at that, because they have that range, and have a very good missile strength. With armor piercing missile damage 7, that's good. The range doesn't increase, which is kind of bad, but they do have a passive ability of giving power recharged plus 20% when they're out of melee. Remember, you cannot be in melee. They have the physical resistance, they are demonic, and late game you do get improvements to almost everything. To their weapon strength, to their missile strength, to their missile resistance, giving them 15%, to their speed. So overall, they become much more of a hybrid unit, which is always excellent to any roster. I always advise to bring a couple of them, even if you're not used to playing with Tzeentch, just because they're kind of like the basic archers and still survive well. And we have an ROR unit of the Exalted Pink Horrors of Tzeentch. So there's a couple of differences. Of course, they have the XP to the maximum, so you can see a little bit of how much, you know, they get into the 40s, almost 50 of melee defense, which is good. They have Warp Flame, which reduces armor and weakness to fire, which is excellent. Most of your attacks do have that fire. And they have the Conduit of Infinity, which replenishes ammunition, one charge of this, that affects allies in range. So you'll notice that a lot of your forces don't have a lot of ammunition. So this is a cool one. I would say that this is the ROR unit to bring in along with some Changebringers or some Flamers of Tzeentch, because they have so low ammunition that you kind of want to use that replenishment with those. And yeah, that's the idea behind that ROR. So for cavalry and chariots, let's start with Chaos Chariots of Tzeentch. Typical chariot, you've seen all of these. Good armor, decent speed, good weapon strength with bonus versus infantry, good charge bonus, everything screams just go in and go out as soon as possible. Don't let them be engaged too long, because they'll die easily, even in the late game. Because they don't get a lot of bonuses, they just get slightly better in terms of the leadership, speed, the charge bonus, and a little bit missile resistance. So they'll always be just typical chariots. You just keep them moving as much as you can, and of course you have better options, but if you're a fan of chariots, by all means, you can bring a couple of these well into the mid game. Centigars of Tzeentch. Now, this is quite a nice unit. I'll explain why. First, they have that Vanguard. Vanguard is always nice for any unit. I always love to have that possibility because it gives you so many strategic possibilities. They don't have a lot of armor or shield, not a lot of melee attack or melee defense, in fact even worse than the chariots. But they have armor piercing on the weapon strength, of course they are 60 entities, and they have all these buffs of Rowdy with buffed vigor. The best one is actually the Arcane Charge. So the effect intensity increases when nearby allies or enemies cast spells. So just make sure that you're casting some spells and then you send these guys in to attack. And then they'll have good damage to whatever they're attacking. So it's good to have like maybe a Vanguard deployed or very close deployed to these guys. A spellcaster, you cast some spells, even if it's just 1 or 2. That's enough to give them already some bonuses. And then suddenly you have a very good Vanguard deployed medium cavalry to wreak some damage. Of course, even late game, they are not a melee cav. This is still like a charge cavalry with the surprise factor of the Vanguard. For proper cavalry, you have Chaos Knights of Tzeentch. Now, they do have a nice bronze shield, 120 armor, so good luck getting rid of them with missiles. Melee attack and melee defense are very good. This is a melee cav. It has a nice weapon strength and charge bonus. So the way that you use these guys is typically that you actually charge in and you let them be there because they are a melee cav. Just make sure that you have someone that can support them. Maybe give them some buffs, maybe give them some ability, maybe give the enemy some debuff. Typically what the biggest issue of these guys is that they don't have a lot of armor piercing, but you have so many ways of destroying the armor of enemies that you gotta consider taking in some Chaos Knights. Always remember that idea. If you prefer, however, you have the advanced version of the Chaos Knights of Tzeentch with lances. Now these are still a melee cav. Even late game, even with the upgrades, you can still say that. But they're much more focused on that charge bonus. So if they didn't have a shield, I would say that these are a shock cavalry. But no, these are still a melee cav. I don't see the shock cavalry value that they have there. Good armor, decent melee defense, especially late game. I mean, you can get these guys staying in melee for quite a prolonged time. Of course, if you want to micromanage them and charge and keep charging around and cycle charging, that's up to you. But it's not exactly that it is necessary with these guys. That's my point. And Tzeentch has this point with the Knights. You already have so much to micro that it may be difficult for you to be, cycle charging anything. You'll most of the time be using abilities. So try to stay out of that if you can. Doom Knights. Now, this is a very good unit because it is flying. That's essentially it. It's a monstrous flying cavalry. That's the idea. Armored and shielded, so good luck. You can use these guys even to draw the enemy missiles because they don't die easily to those. Good weapon strength, but no armor piercing or any other things. Again, that neglection of having no armor piercing. Good charge bonus, which of course it's always nice, but they have Vanguard deployment. And this is such an advantage. You have Vanguard deployment to destroy the enemy armor with someone, and suddenly these guys can charge in on that target and wreck it really fast. But it's always this sort of... Tzeentch doesn't have like a unit that does all easily. They have a few, I'll say. But still, you kind of have to combo with the spells. And that's where I want you to think about it when you're watching these videos in terms of army rosters. So, Doom Knights of Tzeentch, their weakness is what? Oh, yeah, they don't have a lot of armor piercing. Let's reduce the enemy armor and suddenly, whoa, hold on. These guys can do a lot of damage. And they have Vanguard. So that's how I want you to think about them, okay? There's also an ROR version with the Knights of Immolation. In essence, the same unit, but with flaming attacks, which is always good because you do have some units that cause your flaming attacks to do more damage. Remember that it's also a weakness if the enemy has a lot of fire resistance, because it does turn all your damage to fire. Be wary of that. Vanguard deployed as well, and then they have the Searing Torrent, which provides weakness to fire damage and less armor. So this is definitely one good unit to pair with other Chaos Knights, just to reduce the armor of the enemy. They do that Warp Flame, which is excellent. So overall, and they have 5 charges of this, so you can kind of go in, out of melee. It recharges rather fast. Cooldown of 60 seconds is rather fast, okay? So you can use maybe 2-3 of these without issue. Always remember to make sure that your enemies have that Warp Flame under them, so that they have reduced armor, and that enhances so many of your units and allows so many of your units to be used. Marauder Horsemen of Tzeentch. Now, a typical light cavalry just to harass, that's the idea here. Very low armor, melee defense, or weapon strength. Don't engage them unless it's a sure victory in melee, of course. But the main idea, of course, their ranged attack, the fact that they fire whilst moving, they have Vanguard deployment, and they have a hidden thing, Warp Flame. So it's one of the very early units that you can get with Warp Flame there, to reduce the enemy armor, to get them a weakness to that fire damage, and suddenly it's really good. Even having just one, using that Warp Flame kind of like you do with poison units, just making sure that every single enemy unit has that Warp Flame, that's something you can do with these guys. Just think about it, especially early game units, early game battles. One of these guys can do a lot of work for you. Later on, of course, you can use one of the units. It's kind of like still OP. They fly. That's the biggest thing about them, the Change Bringers. These are monstrous missile infantry. They shouldn't go into melee with that low melee defense of 12 and armor of 10, no shield, so they're so weak. Even if I throw a sandwich at them, they're gonna die. Don't get the armor piercing weapon strength up to you, because that's not what is gonna save them. What they are there for is for their missile strength. And missile strength it is. Don't just see the 90 range and the missile strength 304. These guys wreck whatever they're shooting at. They have the Warp Flame effect as well, and armor piercing damage on that missile, so that's great as well. So make sure that you're targeting the best of the best units of the enemy with these guys. Remember, they have 12 models. It's not like they are good at wrecking chaff units. No. Take care of the enemy monsters, take care of the enemy single entities, of the enemy lord or heroes. That's what these guys should be targeting as well, perhaps with some support, maybe even the enemy flyers to go in with your Doom Knights, who knows. For specifically targeting single entities, you can still bring a Burning Chariot of Tzeentch. Now, fire whilst moving is always good, and it does fly, which is always nice. So many flyers with Tzeentch, it's always nice. It does have abysmal melee stats, even though they have this weird factor of having weapon strength with armor piercing. And they still get even more weapon strength after upgrades, which is even weirder. But the biggest case here is the missile strength. That's a lot of damage, actually, and it even has a small vortex effect. It does the Warp Flame. It is armor piercing. This is typically, if they manage to hit, these guys are supposed to be single entity killers. That's the main purpose of them, but they sometimes miss out their shots. So just make sure that you get increasing that accuracy by increasing their XP as quick as possible, and then they will be able to shoot characters. Maybe bring 2, maybe bring 1, just to keep shooting those enemy characters or single entities. Moving on to monsters. So first we have the Furies of Tzeentch. So Furies, like any Furies, they are good, but they're kind of like, how to say, unlike Furies of Slaanesh, which are the only flyer they have, Furies of Tzeentch kind of lose it a little bit, because you already have a lot of flyers, okay? But of course, early game, they're still useful. Remember that they have very poor armor, very poor melee defense, no matter how you get them, upgraded. Note that there's nothing on research for these guys, which it's amazing how the lack of blue exists on all those. I can assure you, I checked the research. The best advantage of them is, of course, they fly and they have Vanguard. So they fly, they have Vanguard, they dive in and they kill or try to kill or harass whatever you want. And that's good. Of course, you have better units than that with the Screamers of Tzeentch. Why? It's not like they're they have much better armor or melee attack or melee defense, they have much better weapon strength, and they have armor piercing and a bonus versus large. So they are good actually to deal with enemies on the sky. They're very good to deal with a very weak spellcaster that actually happens to have a flying mount. Goodbye to him. You know, and that Vanguard deployment of course helps with this. It's actually a very good demonic unit to send in on an enemy caster and just let it be. Of course, just be very careful, they are squishy. This is not exactly the best of the best of the best. I think Tzeentch suffers a little bit from units that are rather weird. Nothing is really the top of the top of the top. Well, maybe Chosen of Tzeentch, but what I mean is you always have to use these units with the specific purpose in mind. Here's a purpose for you with the Shrieking Sky Rays, the Screamers of Tzeentch. So just basically better Screamers of Tzeentch, okay? Still with that bonus versus large, better melee attack, better melee defense stats, of course, Vanguard deployment, that's nice. And then they have this Lamprey's Bite. 5 charges of this. It doesn't do a lot of damage. It's no armor piercing whatsoever, but it does reduce the movement speed. So overall, it doesn't say that, but it just says radius and then movement speed. So overall, when you cast it, the enemy will not be able to move that fast. So it's always useful to have these guys maybe on the background, trying to avoid the enemy from doing a charge. Note how fast that effect goes. It's truly just to make sure that the enemy doesn't charge in as fast, because you're reducing their speed and they just take that extra shot from some missile unit or give you the extra time to reach them. Now let's get to a unit that so many people go around and I'm like, man, don't do that. Spawn of Tzeentch. So yeah, they are unbreakable. That's the biggest trait that everyone gives to Spawn of Tzeentch, to spawn units. They do have the barrier, which enhances their survivability, of course. Very low armor and melee defense, so they die easily. But they have magical attacks, of course, because they are Tzeentch, and they have the best one, Sundered Armor. So now you combine the Spawn of Tzeentch and your Chaos Lords or your Chosen of Tzeentch, and suddenly, if the enemy has a lot of armor, they no longer have it. I mean, 100 going down to 70 is already a lot. Combine that with the Warp Flame, and that's 60. And you can even have a Plague of Rust, and that's 0. That's it. That's some combos there for you. So that's Tzeentch. You can sometimes surprise a lot of the enemy by ensuring that suddenly what they think they have as an armored unit that you're not going to breach through, suddenly it becomes a paper towel. And it can go through that unit, reach the enemy backline, and do your worst. So that's just an idea. You don't need to bring 5 of these. Just bring 1, you know? Just bring the word spawn. It still has that Sundered Armor, okay? And the only thing that actually has in advance is it has better stats and weirdly just some more physical resistance. That's it. This is like not exactly the best of the ROR units, but if you're looking for an ROR to just use up with maybe your cavalry units, maybe your Doom Knights, just pick this one up. Put them in the army and use that Sundered Armor. Instead, you may try to use the Poison. Cockatrice is a nice addition to the Tzeentch army. Low armor, but good melee attack and good melee defense with that Poison and armor-piercing weapon strength, which is still rather good. The main use, of course, is this poison. Just go around, poison the enemies. It's a flyer. You can go in, target specific units. And then you have the Petrifying Gaze, which you use on one enemy, okay? Preferably the Lord or you know, someone very good. They'll start losing their speed, and suddenly on phase 4, they cannot move. And you'll have so many ways to stop targets from moving with Tzeentch that, I mean, come on! Always use that. The biggest problem that I've been talking about this whole video and the last video is how Tzeentch is so micro-intensive. You're gonna forget about most of these combos. So just make sure that you have maybe like a small list for like, okay, I'm gonna use the Cockatrice to go poison on their front line and then use the ability on the enemy lord. And that's it. because you plan that out, it's so much easier to do that later on in battle. Chaos War Shrine of Tzeentch. So most War Shrines, of course, they have some effects, and that's the same and true for the Chaos War Shrine of Tzeentch. Overall, not exactly a single entity that should go into combat. It's very tanky. It has about the weapon strength of a medium caster, let's say, or a heavy caster, let's say. No armor piercing though, so it's not like it can go in and attack. But it has the giver of arcane glory. And what this is that with each nearby entity death, it gives spell mastery, power recharge, and reserves per second to themselves, and to an ally spell mastery up to 30%. So just keep one of these on your front line. Typically this is used as a mount, okay, but if you want to bring the unit itself, just remember the idea. It's to accompany the front line, okay. Leadership enhancement always helps, and it still has the encourage, so this is a lot of leadership. If you want to run maybe a demonic army, you can bring a Chaos War Shrine to ensure that your units don't rout immediately, they don't start taking too much damage from being demonic, okay. That's basically the main idea behind this. Of course, later on it gets better stats, but it's not like it's going to beat any war mammoths or anything like that. Just survive a little bit better. Now, let's go for the Lord of Change. This unit is so underrated for me. I always like the flyers. I don't mind the lack of armor or shield, because flying just gives you so many possibilities if you know how to use that. Weapon strength with good armor piercing. It's the same as the cockatrice, so it doesn't have the poison. It does have that physical resistance, okay? And then it has 2 bound spells. The Blue Fire of Tzeentch, which gives the Warp Flame, and it does have the Pink Fire of Tzeentch, which is a breath spell that does have that Warp Flame. Again, you have so many ways of reducing the armor and weakening the enemy. That's kind of what you should be doing. And that's the idea behind all of these weird combos. You're just reducing the enemy armor to the point that you really don't need the armor-piercing units. And that's the point. You can use units that typically you wouldn't use because you're reducing the enemy armor so easily. If you prefer, you even have a Lord of Change ROR, the Golden Griffin of Theurgy, which instead of the bound spells of Tzeentch has the bound spells of metal. Basically, it's just an advanced Lord of Change. It has that gift of mutation that's from someone else, but it's a flying monster. It has better armor, of course, better stats. Searing Doom, it's a nice bombardment. It's always good to have. And Gehenna's Golden Hounds is a nice vortex as well. It's not the best of the best of the best of the spells, but it doesn't hurt to have some more possibilities. And as you can see, yet again, another unit with abilities, another unit that you have to combine with someone else to do the damage. And that's Tzeentch for you. But you do have a lot of combinations available to you. For example, the Mudalith Vortex Beast. Let's talk about this one. It's a colossal monster, honestly. A good armor, not big armor, but good armor. Nice melee attack and melee defense. Good melee defense, actually, for a beast unit. Nice weapon strength, more on the aspect of a mammoth, for instance. And then it has the Gift of Mutation, giving allies +8 melee attack. Now, that's always good. It's always decent, always good to bring a couple of these to make sure that you affect your whole front line. Then you have the Mortis Engine effect, so enemies, while you're in melee, it will cause damage to combatants. It's always good against the infantry, which is what this unit should be doing. And then you have the Tides of Transformation, even more direct damage ability. When engaged in melee, gives a disoriented effect, reducing the enemy speed, which is great. It's always nice overall, and it has some missile resistance by default. Later on, it gets a lot of spell resistance and even more armor and melee attack and weapon strength, just becoming that much better at what it does. Just accompanying infantry or even accompanying cavalry and doing a ton of damage to whatever they encounter. Just be careful with any dedicated anti-large units. Maybe, don't go with a Mudalith against Ungrim, because Ungrim is going to kill her. That's for sure. If you prefer, you have the ROR, Mutolith, the Aeson the Fallen. So overall improved stats, of course, because of the XP, and it does have the same weapon strength, so kind of a little bit bonus versus infantry, armor piercing, blah 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 blah. Oops. And what we have? Still the Gift of Mutation, so you can definitely use it's just in a better version of the Mutolith Vortex Beast. It does have an ability that I'll show, which is the Maelstrom of Chain. Now this is a chain hex, gives damage per second to enemies, maximum 5, so it will spread along enemy units. You have 3 charges of this, so basically this unit is a killer. This is the unit that you can destroy a front line with. Now my idea would be you bring maybe a Lord of Change or someone to reduce the armor or to warp flame the whole infantry line, and then you cast this and suddenly everyone is so weak and your units just demolish the front line. Let's go on to some missile monsters. Flamers of Tzeentch. These basically are not flyers. Remember, that's the biggest problem of them. They have low range, they have weapon strength with armor piercing, but don't get them in melee. Really don't get them in melee. They don't have the hit points, armor, or melee defense to it. I think peasants can defeat them in melee. But they have a nice, very nice missile strength, which is armor piercing and gives that warp flame effect. Don't neglect this warp flame effect because it always combines with everything. And if you don't at least have one unit to do it, it's kind of weird because so many units have it. Now in the late game it just becomes a little bit better range, better missile strength, you know, it improves on the reload speed, which is always nice. It has a little bit more spell resistance, but weirdly in the redline skills it gets more weapon strength. I'm not going to use those in melee, but still that's how they decided. Weird choices, but still, that's the Exalted Flamers. You have also the single entity, the Exalted Flamer of Tzeentch. Now, the main purpose of this guy is kind of like the Burning Chariot. It's a single entity killer, okay? From afar, it has more range, okay? It still has the appalling armor and melee defense and hit points, so don't get him in melee. It can do some damage in melee, but it's like the last resort. It's like the last shot, maybe. The main idea is, of course, that 1k damage. That's the purpose of this guy. To shoot a single target, maybe monstrous infantry or monstrous cavalry. Just make sure that he doesn't get hit back, because with that low armor, low hit point count, it gets destroyed real easily, real fast. Again, the warp flame, you already learned how to use that, but just make sure that you make use of these warp flame effects the most that you can. Use the cockatrice for the poison, use spells to diminish the enemy's ability, and who spoke about damage? Let your units do the damage and you debuff them all. Finally, the last unit, we have the Soul Grinder of Tzeentch. Now, like most soul grinders, good armor, good melee defense stats, good weapon strength for getting in melee, even with armor piercing, that's great. Even late game, they will gain benefits from that. But the advantage of the soul grinder of Tzeentch is that it has a good range. 250, it's almost there with some artillery, so that's good. 250, it's a good range. And you have a very good missile strength, 500, lots of shots per volley with the bonuses versus large. So his intended target is actually to go after large targets. I would say just make sure that you target whatever is going to be making your armies more vulnerable, okay? Because most of the Tzeentch units, you don't have a lot of ammunition. And especially with the Soul Grinder 15, it's also not the same. It's the same thing with the Changebringers. So you gotta make your shots count. That's the biggest issue with those lower ammunition units, of course, is that you have this problem, right? But yet, it's still a very nice unit. And that's all the units from Tzeentch. I hope you guys enjoyed this one. This is still 43 minutes, even without the part with the Lord, so that's why I've been spreading these out, and it gives me a headache every time that I'm casting these, because it's 40 minutes speaking. So I'm gonna rest my voice, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.